Hello, thank you so much for joining me. Hi, fellow writers. I am Emma Kress. I am a longtime teacher and I am the author of the young adult novel Dangerous Play. My book copies, this isn't come out till August 3rd, and my books just arrived last night. So I can actually hold a real copy. And look, the inside is yellow. It's very exciting. So Dangerous Play is a young adult contemporary novel about a field hockey team captain who gets assaulted and her ride or die team who become vigilantes. It releases in print and ebook from Macmillan and an audiobook from Orange Sky Audio in 19 days. Not that I'm counting. I'm totally, completely chill. I am made of chill and filled with hope, which is handy since that is what we'll talk about today. So as part of my MFA program, I spent about a year researching hope and thinking about and discovering ways in which hope might help writers create better stories. And that was in 2019. What a stroke of luck, because wow, did I need to put that research into practice when 2020 hit and then continued into 2021. What I will teach you today, I hope, will have a profound impact on both your writing and your well-being. So I want you to listen with two hats, one for yourself and one for your writer self. Please, sorry, I was just refocusing. Given the nature of Zoom, this is going to look like a lecture, but I have carved out space for independent writing. I'm not using a PowerPoint because I just can't take another PowerPoint Zoom, and I thought you might feel similarly. So instead, I'm going to be holding things up now and then the old-fashioned way. You will want something to write with and something to write on. Okay, let's jump in. First, I want to introduce you to C.R. Snyder. He's pretty much the psychological big cheese of hope. Snyder says that hope comes down to three things: a goal, pathways thinking, and agency thinking. A goal, you know what that is, but the goal must be reasonable and attainable. So while for one of your characters, a reasonable goal might be building a vacation villa on Pluto, you are going to want to ground your goal on planet Earth. Pathways thinking is the plan to get that goal. And I love Snyder's language here, pathways thinking. It's the ability to not just create one plan, but to continue to make adjustments to that plan and perhaps even to the goal itself, depending upon the obstacles that you face. This requires flexibility and adaptability. Finally, agency thinking is believing you can do it. It's looking at your past and knowing you've surmounted similar obstacles. It's recognizing that you've got strengths that will help you attain your goal and fulfill that desire. This requires confidence and resilience. And here's the cool thing. Yes, you need to be flexible as you adapt your goals and develop new plans. And yes, you need a splash of confidence to have that can-do agency thinking. But hopeful thinking begets hopeful thinking. The more that you complete these small goals, the more you build your creativity, flexibility, adaptability, confidence, and resilience. Now, I know what you're thinking. It's a bit of a catch-22, right? How do you build confidence if you need confidence to get confidence? Two ways. One, start small. Make those early goals really achievable, then build up. And two, hope sparklers. What are hope sparklers, you ask? Well, I made them up, but they're an umbrella term that I made for all the things that I believe give us hope. So I want you to think back over the last year and a half. We have faced a pandemic of epic proportions. We've witnessed the murder of George Floyd and all of the protests that followed. We've witnessed a contested political race and deep social and political unrest. We've had to face all this while trying to tend to our families, our jobs, our homes, like we did in years past, even though life could not look more different as we struggled to keep ourselves and our families safe, as our children attended school from their bedrooms, as we mourned losses, small and big. I want you to take a minute to think about what and who has gotten you through. And I want you to make a couple of notes. Name what and who got you to the point where you could sit here with me today. I'm going to give you 30 seconds. So you just made a list of your hope sparklers. In my research, I came across what I came to call hope sparklers, and this is how I grouped them. Friends, family, inspirational leaders in your community, religion, philosophy, belief system, faith and ruling bodies. I'll revisit that one later. Your own positive characteristics, creativity, humor, optimism, gratitude, passion, and talents. Remember in the early months of the pandemic when it seemed like everybody you knew was baking and gardening? That should tell us something, and not just that we need to stock up on plants and flour. And then place, comfort, and in the safety of our own home. Now, here's another hope sparkler that some of you may have written down. Books, stories. Stories deserve their own category altogether because not only can they act as hope sparklers in their own right, but they allow readers to experience all of the hope sparklers we mentioned through reading and empathizing with the main character, which is why they can be so healing. This is key to our beginning to think about hope, not just as a psychological life raft, but as a tool in our writer's tool belt. Our friend C.R. Snyder tells us that the average person will tell or think about at least 3 stories per hour. 3 stories per hour. Snyder and his colleagues argue that these stories are vital as children form their own identities and communicate who they are to others. This is particularly important when we're talking about children who don't have access to as many hope sparklers as other children. It's also important when we think about adults, either ourselves or our characters who've been isolated this year from their usual hope sparklers. Now, you've probably been able to tell this with the 9 minutes that we spent together, but I'm a full-blown ticker. I know it's a shock, but I do live with some Eeyores. Perhaps you too are an Eeyore, love an Eeyore, or have created Eeyore characters. If so, this next bit's for you. I want to discuss obstacles. So Snyder never explicitly mentions the importance of failure. Yet, if hope is dependent upon people's ability to come up with alternate pathways when they meet an obstacle, as well as upon people's beliefs that they have agency and can overcome obstacles because they've done it before, then it seems that the obstacle itself is a necessary building block for hope. As the researcher Brene Brown says, hope is brokenhearted on the way to becoming wholehearted. Hope is a function of struggle. I love that so much. I'm going to say it again. Hope is brokenhearted on the way to becoming wholehearted. Hope is a function of struggle. So obstacles, failure, and struggle are all part of what it means to be a hopeful thinker. In fact, Snyder's research suggests that high hope people face just as many obstacles. It's just that they've found new ways around them and believe they can adapt and persevere. That's why that term pathways thinking is so powerful. High hope people switch more easily between goals in different areas of their lives. So if a goal isn't panning out at work, they switch to a friendship goal or a recreation goal. Meanwhile, low hope people struggle to see a clear path to their goal and don't know what to do when they encounter an obstacle. It is the reaction to an obstacle that determines whether someone will proceed or give up. Snyder suggests that generally hopeless people progress from hope to rage, from rage to despair, and from despair to apathy. So let's focus in on children, because while adults can certainly be low or high hope, often these habits were created in childhood. And this is helpful if you're writing child characters, but also as you think about those backstories and misbeliefs of your adult characters. Snyder explains that in order for children to have hopeful thinking, there are a few things they should have in place. Children require a solid attachment to a caregiver who is a positive model who spends quality time with the child, psychologically and emotionally available to the child, and who takes pleasure in the child's activities. Also, the child must feel safe in exploring a stable and mentally stimulating environment where rules seem consistent and conflict resolution can be readily understood and mastered, end quote. So if we return to our list of hope sparklers, you'll see that there's a great deal of overlap with hope sparklers 1, 2, and 5. When these supportive elements are absent, the child may experience, quote, negative repercussions, such as, quote, poor overall problem-solving capabilities, become, quote, distractible, lack, quote, persistence and enthusiasm, and have a reduced capacity to learn and adapt. That's why some children undergoing psychological hardships lose their hope-related thoughts and actions. And yet, there are some children who emerge from death or divorce, abuse, or neglect with their hope sequence intact. So based on the work of Dr. Michael Mahoney, Snyder lists 5 ingredients as a solid recipe for high hope in these children. Number 1, early awareness that one's parents are not functioning well. 2, identification and frequent use of alternate persons as sources of security, nurturance, and developmental identification. 3, early identification and refinement of special talent that opens new developmental paths and social networks. 4, high motivation to develop, often expressed in unusual tenacity and intensity of activity. And 5, a tendency to experience frustrations and even trauma as challenges and opportunities for development. And that addresses our other missing sparklers. I want to circle back to our hope sparkler in which we have faith in ruling powers. This period of time has been challenging, whatever your politics are. And yet many of us have retained our sense of hope. This also helps us see that these checklists aren't just for kids, they're for us too. So if we examine that first statement through the lens of our collective experience, that one that said awareness that one's parents aren't functioning well. So even if we're stuck with parents or bosses or a government that isn't functioning well, it turns out that by simply owning this fact, we can hold on to hope. I also want to re-examine that final point, a tendency to experience frustrations and even trauma as challenges and opportunities for development. And we've been doing that too. How many of us expressed hope over the last year and a half that this traumatic experience would offer a new way forward? We saw wildlife return to places where it was absent for decades. We saw a yearning for connection and community, even from 6 feet apart. We saw artists work collectively and virtually. We saw communities bloom in the wake of George Floyd's murder and a renewed commitment to anti-racist teaching and awareness. We hoped together even when we were separated. We hope that out of this horrible thing, we might remake this world into something better and more beautiful. There is almost something thrilling about the concept that we are collectively living through a time that can act as the blueprint for future hopeful thinking. Think about it. Think about all that you survived this last year. Think about all that you've witnessed that speaks to our collective perseverance. And then think about this. When something down the line throws a punch, you'll be all, dude, you ain't got nothing. I've been through worse. The world is filled with hard. Readers need hope. Hope is not a luxury. It's not a fluffy, superficial add-on. It is an essential tool for living in this world. We all need hope. And writers for children and young adults in particular should not deny children the practice of it. Stories are ideal training ground for that practice. So let's return to this idea of the story as a hope sparkler. Stories allow readers to explore those goals, pathways thinking, and agency thinking on their own terms from the comfort of their own beds. Remember, children build their sense of selves through story. And when we tell ourselves these stories at the shocking rate of 3 stories per hour, stories are also our constant companions. Stories then can act as the practice arenas for hope, and writers are in the unique and enviable position to imagine that arena. This is not an argument to squeeze books into some moral box, nor is it a plea to turn authors into preachers, teachers, or counselors. Far from it. But writers can use the insights of psychologists and social scientists to explore characters more deeply, reveal their complexity, and better attend to their authentic emotional progress. That's just good writing. So let's put on your writer's hat. Let's talk about how hope can be an essential tool in your writing tool belt. I want to begin with desire. Author Robert Olin Butler, in his book, From Where You Dream, explains, one way to understand plot is that it represents the dynamics of desire. So characters need desire. But what are those dynamics of desire that propel the plot? Scenes and sequels. You might think of scenes as the nuggets of action that move the story forward, and sequels as the links that join those scenes. You can find thorough breakdowns of the scene sequel cycle online and in many craft books, but for our purposes, we'll do a brief overview. So first we have a goal, followed by a conflict, followed by some kind of failure, complication, setback, or disaster. And in the sequel, the character reacts to the setback, faces a dilemma, and makes a choice. Back to desire. So we need desire to have a goal, and a goal in many respects is the manifestation of desire. But you may have noticed a large gap. Think about it. Okay. You have a goal, la, la, la. You have a conflict and obstacles on the way to that goal, boo. You have a setback, more boo. You have a reaction to that setback, totally wallowing in the boo. Then somehow you magically pep up enough to actually make a decision about the two bad choices sitting in front of you. Why not give up entirely? Hope. To even have desire in the first place, to believe that the desire has a chance of fulfillment, the character must possess hope. As C.R. Snyder states, to desire, in short, is to hope. So let's remind ourselves of his hope theory. 1, a goal. 2, pathways thinking. 3, agency thinking. Sound familiar? There's a goal. There's a plan. There's an obstacle. There's a recovery from that plan, which is pathways thinking. There's flexibility as the plan and or goal is reassessed. And somewhere in that sequel, the character digs down and finds their agency. I would bet in most of the books that you love, you'll see an overarching hope sequence made up of smaller hope cycles that spiral us toward the final hopeful finish. Our first concrete strategy relates to your B story. A B story is just a big subplot. While the A story may be about the main character achieving their big goal, the B story may be the thing that helps the main character grow internally. Some people differentiate between the two by describing the A story as what the character wants, while the B story is what they need. I want to posit a more nuanced purpose for the B story. I believe that the B story can be a series of events that builds the main character's agency thinking so that they can be successful in the A story. Remember, if one of the necessities for a person to achieve a goal, particularly after facing obstacles, is to find their agency thinking, their I can do this, they have to have experience with getting through a hard thing and coming out the other side. They have to. A B story then can give the main character the confidence, resilience, and courage to move forward with the main plot. So I'm going to take you through a very short example using the book Clementine by Sarah Pennypacker. Clementine's a chapter book, which makes it easy to sum up and talk about, but the lessons here can be applied to any novel for any audience. Clementine is about a girl named Clementine who lives with her family in an apartment building where her father is the building's manager. As the building's manager, Clementine's father is responsible for keeping the front of the, looking to my page, front of the building clean and free from pigeon poop. You can see the two of them at it. Unfortunately, every time he tries to get rid of the pesky pigeons, they return. He enlists Clementine's help in what he calls the Great Pigeon War. Clementine's father is a blazing hope sparkler. He gives his daughter a lot of agency in generating solutions. And Clementine uses another hope sparkler, her ingenuity and creative problem solving to come up with solutions, such as diapering the pigeons, which doesn't really seem practical. Next, Clementine decides to scare the pigeons by enlarging a picture of her cat, Polka Dotty. She needs to put it in one of the top windows. When she visits old Mrs. Jacoby to borrow her window, Mrs. Jacoby does a fascinating thing. Mrs. Jacoby dumps half a box of Cheerios onto the windowsill to feed the pigeons. This, for my fellow structure geeks, happens right at the 75% mark. And I also want you to tune into the fact that this is a beautiful cause and effect thread. Clementine would not have discovered the real reason the pigeons like to congregate in the front of the building if not for the idea that came before it to hang the cat's photo in Mrs. Jacoby's window. So in this moment, Clementine realizes that if she simply moves the pigeon feeding ground to the side of the building, everyone, Mrs. Jacoby, her dad, even the pigeons, will be happy. So look again at Snyder's hope theory. Clementine's goal was unwavering, to get rid of the poop on the stoop. And Pennypacker included so many hope sparklers to keep that goal in Clementine's sights: her father's support and trust, her unique worldview, her creativity. She faced obstacles, but she persevered. It is through experiences like this that we build our agency. And that is the coolest thing about the whole pigeon war. As a B story, the confidence and resilience that get fueled by the pigeon war give Clementine the courage to move forward with the main plot. As a result, the pigeon war is not just a B story. It is a giant hope sparkler that lights Clementine's way to the ultimate victory. You can see B stories at work in TV shows and movies too. Take a show like Veronica Mars, for example. In the first season, the A story centers around Veronica finding out who murdered her best friend. That takes the full season. But each episode presents a tidier mystery to solve. That smaller episode length mystery always reveals new information that helps with the overall A story mystery. But it also builds Veronica's confidence, resilience, and bank of hope sparklers. She begins as a loner and ends with real friendships. So here's my question for you. Do you have a B story that could actually act as a big hope sparkler for your main character? How might you create a B story that could develop your main character's agency thinking? How might your character's success in the B story light their way to victory in the A story? Get out your sheet of paper again. I'm going to take you through some steps to examine this in more detail. But first, I want you to jot down some ideas for your character's goal in the B plot. So think about your B plot. Think about what might be your B plot. And write down some ideas for what that character's goal might be. And if you're struggling, here's a hint. Often B plots revolve around romantic or family love. Okay, so I'm going to give you 30 seconds to just kind of brainstorm about that. Okay. I want you to pick one of these goals to work with, even if this isn't the goal that you will ultimately land on, just for the purposes of our brainstorming here. I want you to make a table with 3 columns on your paper, and I'm going to show you an example using Clementine and what we just talked about. Just realizing that the light is on here a little bit. There we go. So in your first column, you're going to write down ideas for pathways to get to this goal, to achieve this goal. Now, remember, Clementine had several before she landed on her successful idea. And also, we are reading a finished book here, right? So in some ways, ideally, you're going to list several more ideas. She started with the idea of diapering the pigeons, then moved on to the photo, and finally landed on moving the Cheerios feeding area. So these were her plans to achieve that goal of getting rid of the poop on the stoop. I don't want you to judge your ideas now. I just want you to generate a bunch of ideas. And then in your second column, you're going to write down generate ideas here too for some obstacles that might pop up. And then finally, I want you to list some possible hope sparklers that might help your character pick themselves up after the downer of the obstacle and the setback. And I'll just leave this up here so that you can snap a picture and come back to it if you like. If charts aren't your thing, try this side writing exercise instead. Have your character write you a letter about a time when they experienced success. I'm going to give you a minute and a half. Go. So 3 is considered the lucky number for obstacles in writing. And you can see that Clementine gave us exactly that. But you may have come up with 10. And as I said, that's fine. As you think about which steps might work best as part of your character's pathways thinking, remember to employ a cause and effect thread or mindset as you determine which events and setbacks might make the most sense and in what order. You want your plot to build, not be episodic, or as one famous writer put, and this is attributed to like 10 different writers, one damn thing after the other. If characters have too much hope, writers run the risk of forgetting the emotional baggage that should accompany characters from scene to scene. But if characters don't have enough hope, they can't pick themselves up off the floor of the previous scene, and the story flatlines along with them. Hope is the lifeline, the buoy, the sight of land in the distance. Characters must have that lift to continue the cycle again. If they just bounced from emotional reaction to action again without the space for hope, then desire, they wouldn't have the stamina to go on after getting beaten up. But hope is also a key component of another unlikely element in the scene sequel cycle, conflict. And that leads us to our second concrete strategy. In the nonfiction text Riveted, cognitive science professor Jim Davies seeks to figure out just what it is that makes an idea, object, or experience compelling. He discovers that fear and hope are equally gripping. We pay particular attention to things we hope or fear are true. Hope gives us pleasure, and fear, though we might not particularly enjoy it, demands our attention. Hope and fear connect through desire. René Descartes, and I am holding this up even though this is not the book, he's a French philosopher. He explores this connection in The Passions of the Soul, unfortunately, not Profiles in Mathematics, but this was the closest I could get. I couldn't find my copy. He suggests that the thing that we desire excites hope. The idea that we will lose the thing that we desire excites fear. Much like a riveting antagonist-protagonist relationship, then, one requires the other. Experiencing fear is actually necessary to experiencing hope. More revolutionary still, perhaps the focus should be not on hope or fear, but rather hope and fear. often at once. Descartes states, it must be observed that although these two passions, hope and fear, are contrary, we can nevertheless have them both at the same time. Descartes then suggests not just that hope and fear are related and have the same roots in desire, but that they may and often do coexist simultaneously. Descartes pushes this idea further when he suggests that the coexistence of hope and fear are actually required to reach a kind of equilibrium. Without fear, we lack that anxious passion that will drive us forward and slip instead into complacency. Without hope, we lack that intelligent optimism that will drive us forward. Either way, we stall out. Without the right proportions of hope and fear, then characters risk losing their agency. In Clementine and Veronica Mars, the hope builds steadily to achieve that desired slow burn. Therefore, the fear must rise with similar intensity. As Anne Lamott writes, in times of rational and primitive fear, hope has to do push-ups out in the parking lot to stay pumped, and it does. Hope and fear must be equally matched. The holding of two seemingly opposing forces at once is called a paradox. As Anne Lamott writes, paradox means you have to be able to keep two wildly different ideas in your head at the same time. This is one too many for some people, including me on bad days, and sometimes our fearless leaders. I prefer bumper stickers, I really do. She continues, entering into paradox and thus mystery can be overwhelming. But this is also where new beginnings and hope emerge side by side with the dark and scramble. This feels particularly important now, doesn't it? We know we can have hope and fear at the exact same time because we've been living in a constant state of both since last March. We are not supposed to do the hard stuff alone. We grieve by hugging and holding, not from 6 feet apart. And yet there's been a togetherness in this collective experience, this collective yet isolated grief. There's been tremendous generosity and creativity during this awful time. How else to explain people banging pans from their rooftops in support of healthcare workers, or the scenes of people on their balconies in Italy singing songs, all different songs at the exact same time, or the band of moms linking arms to protect protesters. So keeping up with all this fear, all this struggle, doing push-ups in the parking lot is hope. Now that we acknowledge that hope and fear are deeply intertwined, let's apply that to our writing, because I'm going to go so far as to say that the main conflict in maybe every book is between hope and fear. Think about it. If desire drives every story, and then throughout that story, the conflict between hope and fear rages as the character strives to make that desire come true. Hope and fear are also embedded in the stakes, the prize for success and the punishment for failure. In the comic toolbox, John Voorhouse explains, when we speak of jeopardy, we're not always speaking strictly of a bad thing. The more hope as well as fear that your character invests in an outcome, the more jeopardy he feels. Voorhouse continues, the best situation of all is when overwhelming, unbearable, excruciating hope and mind-numbing, soul-killing, short-soiling fear exist side by side in the same character at the same moment. To highlight this concept, I'm going to do a super quick dive into the middle grade Prince Honor novel Skellig by David Almond. Skellig is a novel about Michael, whose baby sister has just been born and might die. At the start of the novel, his family has moved into a new house, and Michael finds an indefinable creature in the garage, who is later revealed to be Skellig. Throughout the book, Almond creates characters and situations that resist categorization, which goes with our theme, as you'll see. Almond links Skellig and the baby from the very beginning through language. When Skellig is first introduced in the garage, Michael shines, quote, the flashlight on his white face and his black suit. 3 pages later, Michael visits his baby sister in the middle of the night in his parents' room. Her face was dead white and her hair was dead black. The repetition of white followed by black not only links the two characters, but also places black and white opposites within the same image. This same repeated word technique happens later in the work. Michael is working with clay, trying to mold his sister. I tried to form the features of her face. The clay started to dry out in the heat of my fingers. It started to crumble. Just 3 pages later, Michael's very worried about Skellig, and he's desperate to help him to get him out of the unsafe garage. And Michael says to Skellig, "You'll die, you'll crumble away and die." Emphasizing the repeated word, Skellig replies, "Crumble, crumble." Michael seems to believe that if he helps Skellig, the baby will live. Skellig's life is tied inextricably to the baby's. Michael's desire for the baby to live and the hope that this will be realized and the fear that she will die permeates every interaction with Skellig. Later, Michael says to his friend Mina about Skellig, "He won't die." These 3 words beautifully express the intermingling of his hope and fear through subtext. Certainly, it is his hope that Skellig won't die, but by the mere expression of these words, Michael reveals that he fears he will. The connection between Skellig and the baby and their embodiments of Michael's hope and fear are at their highest when Skellig goes missing from the attic. Mina assures him as they climb the stairs, "He'll be waiting for us, Michael. He'll be so pleased to see you again." Much like the earlier "he won't die," these 2 sentences perfectly fuse hope and fear. Mina articulates their hope out loud, but the subtext of fear is right at the surface. If she didn't fear his absence, she wouldn't need to assert his presence. After reading Skellig, readers have learned to accept the fear that comes along with the hope, the pain along with the joy. They're left feeling uplifted. In fact, the final word of the book is joy, the name Michael's parents have decided to give his baby sister. Perhaps readers are more uplifted as a result of the pain the baby and her family have endured. Perhaps they're more uplifted as a result of the emotional complexity, the nuance, the duality. As Descartes suggested, pure joy leads to its own kind of calcification. Perhaps, as Carl Jung states, it's the paradox itself, the gift of holding 2 opposing ideas at once that brings the magic. Only the paradox comes anywhere near to comprehending the fullness of life. Perhaps it's fear that gives hope bite and hope that gives fear resonance. Writers need both hope and fear often at once to capture the complexities of real life on the page. To write compelling stories, writers might do well to position hope and fear as the driving emotional conflict. In The Emotional Craft of Fiction, Donald Mass argues, fear is the greatest in anticipation of the blow, not as the hammer hits. I'm going to say that again. Fear is the greatest in anticipation of the blow, not as the hammer hits. This means that if you play up the hope, your readers will experience that much more fear for your character because there's that much more to lose. Better still, writers might strive for that hope-fear tension in single moments. Writers will transform their writing when they explore the complexity and conflict of containing multiple emotions in a single moment, specifically the emotional paradox of hope versus fear, of hope and fear. Okay, so here's your assignment this time. And again, you might want to just take a picture so you can come back and refer to this. All of these little side writing things I'm doing with you, my intention is not that you are going to get it all done right now. My intention is to get the gears turning so that when our time together is finished, there's a lot percolating and you can just let it loose. Okay, so number 1, first you're going to find a high fear moment in your story. 2, examine the stakes. You want high stakes that result in great hope and great fear. Now, step 3, I want you to write yourself into this scene without talking about the fear. So instead, think about what Almond did, right? Remember his lines, "He won't die." Write lines thick with subtext. Assert that the only possible option or outcome is the hopeful one. Might your character have an endowed object which represents hope? In this presentation, I've used sparklers as an endowed object. How can your chosen object represent hope? Can this object make an appearance in this high fear moment? Might focusing on this high hope object show us just how much the character has to lose without ever mentioning fear? And then finally, slow your moment down. Who is in the scene? What does the main character see or smell or hear? What is the light quality and where is the light coming from? What's the weather? What's in the scene that only the main character would notice in this moment specifically? How might you drill down to notice all the things that your main character hopes to be true? I'm going to lift this up again so you can take a picture if you didn't get to before. And for now, again, don't stress about getting to all of it. I just want your side writing to take you where it wants to go. I'm going to give you 2 minutes for this. Okay, come back to me. Again, this was just to get those gears going. Now to the final element of our talk today, hopeful endings. Writers, particularly writers for children, are familiar with debates about whether endings should be happy. Yet perhaps the happiness of endings is beside the point. The award-winning children's author Lois Lowry champions the hopeful ending instead. She posits that given the all too dystopian elements of the real world we inhabit, children need hope more than ever. She argues, I think they need to see some hope for such a world. I can't imagine writing a book that doesn't have a hopeful ending. Jacqueline Woodson's picture book, Pecan Pie Baby, ends on a hopeful rather than a happy note. And I want to dig in to talk about what I mean here. The main character, Gia, is decidedly unthrilled about her mom's pregnancy and a future sibling, or to use her label, the ding dang baby. A happy ending would mean that Gia gets everything she wants, right? Poof, no baby. But that's unrealistic and offers no hope. Instead, after an emotional outburst, Woodson offers an emotional paradox. And even though there were a whole lot of people in my house, I felt real alone. Then Gia's mother comes upstairs for a comforting chat. She does not yell at Gia for her outburst. She does not tell her she should want the baby. She does not tell her how great it's all going to be. Instead, she does a radical thing. She sits with her daughter, Gia, and shares that she too will miss their old life. Woodson offers a deeply hopeful moment to close the story, so much more authentic and powerful than a happy ending would be. Gia's mom, much like the parents in Clementine, is a hope sparkler in the midst of this uncertain future. Gia's mom doesn't just validate Gia's feelings, she shares them. And to use Snyder's research, she redirects Gia toward a new goal, to be the baby's guide. That's why readers feel hope. Clearly, a baby will change their lives, but the love between Gia and her mother will remain strong, and Gia will have an important place in this new family. So you see how this book is teaching kids how to be hopeful thinkers by navigating that pathways thinking and teaching them to switch goals. One of the most powerful ways to ensure a hopeful ending is to rewrite the world as it should be. These hopeful endings can even be a catalyst for change. There's a bumper sticker I've always loved. If you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. And anger is important when you're trying to enact change, but anger gets you nowhere without hope. If all you do is get angry, it just festers. Hope is what turns anger into a catalyst, a change agent. And we writers know that you must have catalysts and you must have change. Otherwise, what's the point? Hope isn't some Pollyanna-ish idea. It's a rebellious, resilient act. This has been living on my fridge for years. The environmentalist Alex Steffen once wrote, "Optimism is a political act. Those who benefit from the status quo are perfectly happy for us to think nothing is going to get any better. In fact, these days, cynicism is obedience." On the other side of freedom, the case for hope, activist DeRay McKesson writes, "We can't fight for what we can't imagine." He argues, "We have never seen a world of equity, justice, and joy. We are trying to create something altogether new, and it is impossible to create something new in the absence of hope." Writers are in the position to imagine what that hopeful future could look like. In doing so, not only can writers offer readers relief from their deeply challenging present reality, but they can also offer a kind of hopeful blueprint for a new future. When rewriting the world as it should be, writers have the opportunity to push the boundaries of what's been done before. And there are so many exciting books doing this. Once and Future by A.R. Capetta and Corey McCarthy explores a hopeful twist on the old King Arthur legend and is populated by a full cast of gender fluid characters. It's a veritable hope explosion. Another hope explosion, Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. Not only does McQuiston create a world in which the Prince of England and the first son of the USA fall in love, but they envision an entirely new political landscape. Sanda Menon's When Dimple Met Rishi offers a thoroughly feminist take on a love story, which makes the romantic ending so much more hopeful. In fact, many of my favorite books offer hopeful rather than happy endings. As I was talking, I hope that you're looking at your shelves, thinking about what hopeful books live there for you. And I would love to hear about them. Feel free to tweet at me. My Twitter is at Emma, EMMA, /Kress, KRESS. That's also my TikTok handle, should you be there. But I would love to hear about what it is that you think are the hopeful books. And we can use the hashtag hopeful books, because I love filling my TBR with hopeful books. So I want you to remind ourselves of the difference between hopeful and happy. So remember back to our analysis of Pecan Pie Baby. When we think of happy, we think of the character getting everything they want, right? But that's unrealistic. Everything is solved. It's a little too neat. But when we think of a hopeful ending, the words that come to my mind are realistic, authentic, believable, having the good with the hard, complex, nuanced. So I want you to free write for just a minute about a happy ending for your story. I'm going to give you just a few seconds for this. Remember that for Gia, this would mean she gets exactly what she wants, no sibling. So think about all the problems that your main character has in your story. What would be a purely happy ending for your main character? I'll give you just a few seconds. Now I want you to think about an ending that would offer the main character and the reader hope. How might you give your hero what they need rather than what they want? How might you highlight the gray areas that your writing has uncovered? How might you lean into complexity and nuance and embrace the paradox? Remember Jung's words, only the paradox comes anywhere near to comprehending the fullness of life. And as you write, I'm going to give you a few seconds here. Feel free to just do a bulleted list and see how many endings you can think of, or do a stream of consciousness free write. But again, you're looking for what would be hopeful. Okay, so we've talked about psychological hope theory and how you can apply it in your own life. We've looked at the critical role hope must play in the scene sequel cycle. We've talked about the heavy lifting that your B story can do to build hopeful thinking in your main character. We've talked about the powerful way in which hope and fear are inextricably linked and the central conflict in maybe anything you write. And we've talked about the power of the hopeful rather than the happy ending. I hope that I've given you tools for how to build and repair your own hope during these deeply challenging times. But I also hope that I've given you the tools to help you share that gift with your readers. As readers, we can allow books to be our hope sparklers and light the way through this dark time. As writers, we can write the books that will act as those all-important hope sparklers. Isn't that cool? To hope is to believe that we can do better, be better. To hope is to stretch our imaginations for what's possible and forge our own pathways, no matter the odds or obstacles. To hope and to exchange that hope with others means believing we've got this, because we do. As you look back on all that you've overcome in your life and all that we've collectively overcome this last year, just to be in this moment together, allow yourself to feel the weight of that achievement. Whew. This doesn't have to be our whole story. It doesn't even have to be our B story. I mean, goodness knows the writing could really use some work. What was up with the murder wasps? But it can be a story that uplifts us. It can be the story that reminds us of our agency, strength, and resilience. Now, go forth and spark some hope. I would love to hear from you more. You can find out more about me and my work at www.emmakress.com, EMMAKRESS.com. My book, debut book, comes out August 3rd from Macmillan and Orange Sky Audio. And you can follow and interact with me on Twitter and TikTok at Emma_Kress, and on Instagram, where I post lots of writer-related things. I do lots of IG Live interviews, and they're all living on my IGTV. And you can find those at kress.emma, KRESS.EMMA. I'm wishing you all kinds of love and luck and hope as you write your way forward. Thank you for this time.